You're not family
The court
anymore.
order is
So
clear.
do everyone a favor
I
and stop
suggest you read
showing
it
up.
again before you try
Marcus
contacting her.
smirked it through the storm door glass on Thanksgiving to the woman who had carried him to the hospital with a 104 fever twice before he could walk. He thought the locks made it true. Eunice Caldwell stood on her own front porch in her good gray coat, a sweet potato casserole still warm against her palms. She had used the heavy glass dish, the one she saved for company. Her house key was already in her hand. She had been working it in the deadbolt for the better part of a minute before the truth of it reached her. The key was right. The lock was new. That new lock would turn out to be the most expensive decision Marcus Caldwell ever made. He just could not hear the cost yet. She tried the key again, slower, the way a nurse checks a pulse she already knows the answer to. Brass scraped against brass. Nothing turned. Behind the glass, her son folded his arms. His wife, Lindsay, hovered at his shoulder under the warm yellow hall light, a dish towel over one wrist, her eyes not quite reaching Eunice's face. Inside, the table Eunice had set on the fourth Thursday of November for 31 years was set without her. The good cloth was on it. Her chair was gone from the head. Marcus. She said his name once, level and low. Open the door. He leaned in close to the glass so she would hear every word. It's not your door, Mom. Not anymore. Across Hamilton Avenue, old Earl Dawes had stopped raking. He stood at his porch rail with the rake forgotten in his hand, watching the way a man watches a thing he knows he will be asked about later. He raised one hand toward her, the way he had nearly every morning for 20 years. Eunice did not wave back, not because she was angry, because her hands were full, and a woman holding a warm dish on a cold porch does not let her hands shake in front of the street. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The wind turned the dead leaves over in the yard she had planted with her own two hands, and 3 houses down a screen door banged, and the smell of somebody else's turkey came across the cold and went. Here is what Marcus did not understand, standing there so certain, arms crossed like a man who had already won. He had not locked his mother out of his house. He had locked himself out of hers. By Sunday night, he would be the one carrying boxes down these porch steps. The name on the deed to this brick 2-story was not his. It never had been, not for a single day of his life. The answer was already inside the house he thought he owned. It was in the basement, taped to the back of the water heater, sealed in a plain manila envelope with one thing written across it in Eunice's careful hand. Not a name, not a note. A year. 1990. But that was Sunday. This was Thursday. And to understand how a grown man comes to change the locks on the only mother he has ever had, you have to go back a good deal further than this porch. Let me take you back. Eunice Marie Caldwell bought the house on Hamilton Avenue in the fall of 1989. She was 24 years old and she signed for it alone, with her own name and no one else beside it. Back then, half of this old corner of Columbus still had plywood in its windows. The loan officer at the bank on East Broad Street had not wanted to lend to a young single woman with a nursing badge and a checking account that ran thin by the 28th of the month. She sat in his office and did not raise her voice and did not leave until the answer changed. She got the house. She usually got the quiet, stubborn thing she set herself to. For 31 years, she made the payment on night shift wages. She was a hospice nurse, which is the particular kind of nurse who sits with people on the last night they will ever have. She worked the dark hours at one of the big hospitals off East Broad. She took home the cases nobody else wanted, the long goodbyes, the families that came apart in waiting rooms at 3 in the morning. She knew how to hold a stranger's hand and how to keep her own face steady. She brought that same steadiness home and laid it over her own life like a clean sheet. She paid the mortgage in December out of the same checkbook she used to buy Marcus his winter coat. She paid it the month Raymond's truck needed a transmission. She paid it the winter she had pneumonia and worked anyway. 31 years, and she never missed once. Not 1 month. She planted the front garden herself every April on her knees in the cold dirt before a shift. hostas along the walk and a climbing rose by the rail that took her 4 tries to keep alive. The whole block knew her hands. On Hamilton Avenue, the house was not a number, and it was not the Caldwell place. It was Miss Eunice's. That was the address people used. Miss Eunice's 2 words, said Worm. Earl Dawes called her that across the street. The letter carrier called her that. The children, who were grown now and gone, had called her that when they cut through her yard. In the front room, on the wall by the window, hung a small framed thing most visitors never noticed. A nursing pin, gold and worn, pinned to a square of navy felt behind glass. She had earned it at 22. She dusted the frame every Sunday. It was the only thing on that wall she would have run back into a burning house to save. Then there was Raymond. Raymond Foley married her in the spring of 1992, and in all their years, he never once asked to put his name on the door. The house was hers before he ever met her, he liked to say, and a man with any sense does not go looking for credit on a thing that is already built and already paid. When Marcus was born that next winter, it was Raymond who wanted the boy to carry his mother's name, Caldwell. The name already on the deed, already on the mailbox, already on everything in that house that had cost somebody something. Raymond said a name like that should keep going. So their son became Marcus Caldwell, and Raymond Foley never minded once that the 3 of them did not all match on paper. Raymond passed 12 years ago, gentle and too soon in the spring, with Eunice doing for him at home the same thing she had done for so many strangers. She did not talk about that year. But upstairs, at the end of the hall, there was a cedar closet that stayed locked, and Eunice kept the only key to it on a thin chain she did not let people see. No one was allowed in there. Not Marcus as a boy, not Marcus as a man, not Lindsay with all her questions. What was inside that closet belonged to Eunice and Raymond and no one else, and the day someone finally opened it would turn out to matter more than anyone in that family could have guessed. That was the woman. That was the house. Now here is how it started to go wrong. It started, the way these things often do, with a kindness. Marcus and Lindsay had been married 8 months when his hours got cut at the parts plant, out by the airport. The apartment over in Franklinton was more than they could carry, so last spring Eunice did what a mother does. She told them to come home for a while, just till they found their feet. There was room. There had always been room. Just temporarily, Marcus said, hauling the first boxes up the porch steps. Couple months tops. We'll be out of your hair before you know it. She believed him. Why would she not? He was her son. The first month was fine. The second month, the trouble started small, the way water starts small. Lindsay rearranged the kitchen so the cups Eunice had kept in the same cabinet since 1990 were suddenly somewhere else. Marcus put his gaming setup in the front room, 3 feet from the framed nursing pin, and the television volume climbed and stayed there. They stopped asking before they used things. Then they stopped using the word guest at all. By summer, Eunice came home from a long shift to find her reading chair, the soft green one that had sat by the front window for 2 decades, moved out to the back porch like something set on the curb. Lindsay had wanted the corner for a little plant stand. It just made more sense for the room, Lindsay said, not unkindly, the way you explain a thing to a tenant. The house is basically ours now anyway. Eunice did not answer that. She carried her own chair back inside, slow, her shoulders still aching from 12 hours on her feet, and she set it down exactly where it had lived for 20 years. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat in her chair in her house, and she let the phrase turn over in the quiet. The house is basically ours now. She had heard a great many things at the bedsides of the dying. She knew the difference between a slip of the tongue and a thing a person actually believed. That one, she understood, was the second kind. She did not take it to Marcus. Not yet. She told herself it was only Lindsay's way that the girl had come up with very little and learned to grab at what she could reach, and that her son would remember himself in time. People show you who they are slowly, she knew, and then all at once. Eunice decided she could wait for the all at once. It came on through the fall, one small thing at a time. In October, she found 2 of her own bank letters opened on the kitchen counter, the flaps torn rough, set back down as if that were normal. When she asked, Marcus shrugged. "I thought it was junk." He did not look up from his phone when he said it. He started talking about the house the way a contractor talks about a job. The kitchen needed gutting. The back porch was a waste of square footage. That climbing rose by the rail was overgrown and he might just pull it. He said these things at her own table, over food she had cooked. Lindsay nodded along and added plans of her own. Neither of them once asked the woman whose name was on the mailbox what she thought. By November, it was Thanksgiving they were rearranging. Lindsay announced, bright as anything, that they would be hosting this year. Her people were driving in from Dayton. There would be a house full. Somewhere in the planning, the day stopped being Eunice's and became theirs. She was told, gently, like a favor, that she did not need to trouble herself with the cooking. She could just bring something, a side. Whatever was easy. She offered to make the sweet potato casserole, the one Marcus had asked for every November of his life. Lindsay said that would be fine, and the way she said fine told Eunice exactly where the line had been drawn and which side of it they had decided she belonged on. 3 days before the holiday, a white van sat at the curb for an hour. A man Eunice did not know worked at her front door with the porch light on. When she came out to ask, Marcus appeared behind her in the hall and said it was nothing. They were just getting the place secured. New hardware, safer for everybody. Eunice looked at the new brass of the deadbolt, bright and strange against her old oak door. Something went quiet and careful inside her chest, the same quiet she used to feel at a bedside when the numbers on the machine began to change. She did not say a word about it. She went back inside her own house, and she began, very calmly, to think. The thinking took 3 days, and it did not look like thinking at all. To Marcus and Lindsay, it looked like a woman finally giving way. Eunice grew quiet in a manner they took for surrender. She stopped correcting them. When Lindsay moved the everyday plates to make room for a set of her own, Eunice said nothing. When Marcus told her, the night before the holiday, that Lindsay's people would be driving in from Dayton and taking the upstairs room, and that maybe his mother would rest easier somewhere with fewer stairs, she only nodded and said that was thoughtful of him. But a hospice nurse learns to read a room the way other people read a clock. Eunice had sat with more families than she could count in the worst hours of their lives, and she knew the particular hush a house makes when the people in it have already decided you are in the way. She heard it now in her own front hall. She heard it in the bright new brass that did not belong on her old oak door. So she watched, the way she had watched 100 monitors in 100 dark rooms. She watched Lindsay pause at the top of the stairs and lay a hand on the cedar closet door, the locked one, and work the handle once, twice, soft, the way a person tests a thing they intend to open later when no one is home. She watched Marcus carry a box of his own paperwork down to the basement and come back up without it. She watched the two of them talk in the kitchen and go quiet when she came in and start up again when she left. On the Wednesday night, the eve of the holiday, Eunice packed a small overnight bag, the soft one with the broken zipper she had carried to 1,000 bedsides, and she told them she would spend the night at her sister's and come by the next afternoon with the casserole. "You sure?" Marcus said. And there was something in his face that she chose that night not to name out loud. Relief. "We've got it handled here. Just come around 2. 2, she said. "I'll bring the sweet potato." She drove the 15 minutes across town to her sister's place on the east side, with her hands steady on the wheel and her mind very far away. Della was 3 years younger than Eunice and had been telling her the truth since they were girls. She opened the door before Eunice could knock, took one look at her sister's face, and stood back to let her in without a single question. That was Della's gift. She knew when a thing needed talking about and when it needed only a warm kitchen and time. "They changed the lock," Eunice said at last at the table, with a cup of tea going cold between her hands. Della set down her own cup. "On your house, on my house. And what did you say to them?" "Nothing yet." Eunice turned the cup a slow quarter turn. "There is a right time to say a thing, Della. You learn that. Sitting where I sat all those years. Some things you say at the bedside, some things you wait and you let the person come to the edge of it themselves." She looked up, and for the first time in 3 days, something moved behind her eyes that was not sorrow. It was closer to certainty. Marcus thinks he changed a lock. He has no earthly idea what he actually did. They did not speak of it again that night. They made the casserole together in Della's kitchen the way they had made 100 holiday dishes, side by side since they were children, Eunice slicing, Della mashing, the kitchen warm with cinnamon and brown sugar. Eunice used the heavy glass dish, the good one, the one she saved for company. She told herself she would set it on her own table the next day in her own dining room, the room where she had served Thanksgiving on the 4th Thursday of November for 31 straight years. She slept little. She did not toss, and she did not weep. She lay in Della's spare room with her good gray coat hung on the back of the door and her hands folded on the blanket, and she let the things settle in her the way water settles, finding its level, going still. In the morning, she pressed her coat, pinned her hair, and put on the small gold earrings Raymond had given her the last good Christmas they had. At 1:30, she lifted the still warm dish from Della's counter and held it against herself like something living. "You want me to come with you?" Della asked. "No," Eunice said. "This part I do standing up." Old Town East was wearing its November best when she turned onto Hamilton Avenue. The big brick houses sat shoulder to shoulder under bare trees. The old Victorians that families like hers had bought and held and kept through every year. Somebody tried to tell them the neighborhood was not theirs to keep. Black families had built their lives on this street for longer than Marcus had been alive, and Eunice Caldwell was one of the names that street was proud of. Miss Eunice's. Everyone knew whose hands had planted which garden. Everyone knew the climbing rose by her porch rail had taken her 4 tries. She parked at the curb. She came up the walk she had laid herself, past the hostas gone brown for the season, and she climbed her own 4 porch steps with the casserole warm against her palms and her house key already in her hand. She worked the key in the deadbolt. It went in part of the way and stopped. She drew it back, looked at it, tried it again. Slower, the way a nurse checks a pulse she already knows the answer to. Brass scraped against brass. Nothing turned. Through the storm door glass, the hall light burned a warm yellow. She could see the table set in the dining room beyond, her good cloth on it. The room full of people she half recognized, Lindsay's people, laughing at something. And then Marcus came down the hall and saw her standing on the porch, and he did not hurry, and he did not open the door. He stopped on the other side of the glass and folded his arms. "Marcus," she said, level and low, the way she had said it 10,000 times across 34 years. "Open the door." He leaned close so she would hear every word through the glass. "It's not your door, Mom. Not anymore." And then, with a little smile that she would carry with her a long time, he said the thing he had clearly been waiting to say. "You're not family anymore, so do everyone a favor and stop showing up." Behind him, Lindsay appeared under the hall light with a dish towel over one wrist, and she did not tell her husband to stop, and she did not meet the older woman's eyes. She only said in that bright voice that had been telling Eunice for months exactly where the line had been drawn. "The house is basically ours now anyway, Eunice. It's just easier this way." There it was again, that phrase. Eunice heard it land, and she filed it away with all the rest. She did not pound on the glass. She did not raise her voice. 31 years of standing steady in rooms where everything was falling apart had taught her what panic was worth, which was nothing, and what stillness was worth, which was everything. She looked at her son through the door of the house she had carried on night shift wages since before he drew his first breath, and she felt the porch hold her up, and she did not shake. The street, though, the street was watching. Across Hamilton Avenue, old Earl Dawes had stopped raking. He stood at his porch rail with the rake forgotten in his hand. For 20 years, that man had lifted his hand to her nearly every morning of her life, and he lifted it now, slow, a question and a promise in one, and his weathered face had gone tight with something that on a younger man would have been anger. Earl Dawes had buried a wife and raised his grandchildren on that street, and he knew exactly what he was looking at, and he did not look away. That was the measure of him. He never once looked away. 2 doors down, Pearl Hutchins had come out onto her own porch with her coat half on, and she stood with one hand pressed flat over her mouth and her eyes filled, and she did not have the words. And to her lasting shame, which she would speak of later to anyone who would listen, she did not cross the yard. Fear keeps good people on their own porches. It is one of the oldest sorrows there is. And down on the corner, the young man renting the old Coleman place stepped out, saw the trouble, and went back inside and shut his door, because trouble that is not yours is the easiest thing in the world to close a door on. Eunice saw him do it. She made no account of him at all. He had not earned even that. The wind turned the dead leaves over in the yard she had planted with her own 2 hands. Somewhere down the block, a screen door banged, and the smell of somebody else's turkey came across the cold and was gone. Eunice looked down at the dish in her hands, the good glass one, still warm. And here is the thing about a woman who has spent her life at the edge of other people's endings. She does not waste motion. She does not beg a door that is decided to stay shut. She bent, slow and certain in her good gray coat, and she set the sweet potato casserole down on the top step of her own porch, square and level, the way you set down a thing you have decided you no longer need to carry. Then she straightened, and she took her phone out of her coat pocket. Marcus, watching through the glass, laughed. She could not hear it, but she could see it, the shape of it, his head tipping back. He thought she was calling for a ride. He thought she was calling someone to cry to. He folded his arms tighter and settled in to watch his mother fail to get into a house that, in his certainty, had finally become his. Eunice scrolled past her sister's name and past the church and past the doctor to a number she had kept in her phone for 12 years and had needed exactly twice. She stood on her own porch in the cold, and she looked her son in the eye through the glass while the phone rang in her ear. And something happened to her face then that Marcus would think about for a long while afterward, lying awake in a place that was not this house, trying to understand how the afternoon had turned. His mother smiled. It was not a cruel smile, and it was not a broken one. It was the smile of a woman who has just remembered, with great clarity, exactly whose name is on a piece of paper folded in a county office downtown. It was the smile of someone holding a thing the other person cannot see and has not thought to ask about. She held her son's gaze through the door he had locked against her, and she let him see her smile. And then she turned, unhurried, and walked back down her own 4 steps to the curb, leaving the casserole steaming faintly in the cold November air behind her. The phone clicked. Caldwell Residence is Daniel Okafor's first thought. Every time you call, Miss Eunice. The lawyer's voice was warm and dry and unsurprised, the voice of a man who had handled her affairs since before Raymond passed. Though I confess I did not expect to hear from you on Thanksgiving. Tell me everybody's well. Everybody's healthy, Daniel. She unlocked her car, sat down behind the wheel, and pulled the door shut against the cold. Through the windshield, she could see her son's shape, still behind the glass, still watching, still certain. I'm going to need to see you. It can wait until Monday. It cannot wait much longer than that. A pause on the line, and when Daniel Okafor spoke again, the warmth had gathered itself into something careful, something that had heard the thing under her steadiness the way she had spent her whole life hearing the thing under other people's. Eunice, what's happened? My son changed the locks on my house, she said. He told me on my own porch that I'm not family anymore. She let out a breath, and it was almost a laugh. He seems to be under the impression that the house belongs to him and his wife. There was a silence on the line, and then Daniel Okafor said the first true thing anyone had said to her in 3 days. And he said it slowly, so that not one word of it could be missed. Now you listen to me, Eunice Caldwell. I have the deed to that house in a file in my office. I drew up the rest of it myself in 1990, and I recorded it downtown with my own 2 hands. There is exactly one name on it. She heard him set something down, heard the old chair creak as he leaned toward the phone. Whatever your boy thinks he locked you out of this afternoon, he has got it precisely backward. Come Monday morning, you are not going to be the one trying to get into that house. Eunice Caldwell sat in her car at the curb, in front of the brick 2-story she had bought alone at 24 years old, and looked at the warm yellow windows full of strangers eating at her table. "No," she said quietly. "I don't expect I will be." She set the phone down on the seat beside her and sat at the curb a moment longer, her hands resting in her lap, watching the warm windows of her own house, the way a person watches a fire from a safe distance. Inside, the people from Dayton were passing dishes she had washed 10,000 times. Lindsay crossed the dining room carrying a gravy boat that had belonged to Raymond's mother, holding it carelessly by the lip, the way you hold a thing you have not yet learned to love. Marcus had gone from behind the glass. He believed the matter was settled. Eunice let herself look for as long as she needed to look. Then she turned the key in her own ignition, and she pulled away from the house on Hamilton Avenue without once glancing in the mirror, because a woman who has made up her mind has no further use for the mirror. Della was waiting on her own porch when Eunice came back across town, standing under the yellow bulb with her arms folded against the cold, and she did not ask how it went, because she could read the answer in the set of her sister's shoulders as Eunice came up the walk. She only opened the door and let the warmth out into the evening and said, "I kept the kettle on." They sat at Della's table again, the same table, and this time Eunice told it all the way through, the key that would not turn, the bright new brass, the words her son had said with the storm door between them, the bright, easy way Lindsay had said the house was basically theirs now anyway. Della listened the way she had listened their whole lives, without interrupting, turning her cup in slow circles. And when Eunice was finished, Della was quiet for a long moment. "You didn't make a scene," Della said. It was not a question. "No, Earl saw." "Earl saw," Eunice said. "Pearl, too. The whole street, I expect, by morning." Della nodded slowly. "And you called Daniel?" "I called Daniel." Her sister looked at her across the table, and something passed between them that did not need saying. The long understanding of 2 women who had grown up in the same small house with the same hard-working parents and had learned the same lessons about what a deed meant and what a name on a paper meant and how a family kept the things it had bled to keep. "Mama always said," Della began, and Eunice finished it with her, the way they had finished each other's sentences since they were girls, "Put it in your own name and keep the paper where you can find it." They almost smiled. The weekend was long and it was quiet, and Eunice did not weep through any of it. She helped Della rake the small yard on Friday, and they went to the early service on Sunday and sat in the pew they had sat in as children. And on Saturday afternoon, Eunice sat alone in Della's spare room with her hands folded and let herself think, very carefully, about a manila envelope. She had taped it behind the water heater in the basement of the house on Hamilton Avenue 11 years ago, in the cold weeks after Raymond passed, when the house had felt too big and too quiet, and she had wanted, more than anything, to put the most important thing she owned somewhere no one would ever think to move it. It was a flat brown envelope, soft now with age, sealed with tape gone amber, and on the front of it she had written one thing in her own steady hand. The year. 1990. Inside, it was the paper that Daniel Okafor had drawn up and recorded for her when Marcus was a small boy. The paper that said in plain language what the world had spent 34 years trying to make her forget. She had not opened that envelope in over a decade. She did not need to. She knew every word that was folded inside it the way she knew the words to the hymns, but it comforted her, sitting in her sister's quiet house, to know exactly where it was, taped to the dark behind the water heater, waiting with her name on it in a house that strangers were eating dinner in. She slept on Sunday night, better than she had slept in a week. Monday morning came up cold and bright. Daniel Okafor's office was on the second floor of a renovated building down on Long Street, a careful book-lined room with a window that looked out over the part of Columbus he had practiced law in for 40 years. And he came around his desk to take both her hands when she walked in, and he held them a moment, and he looked at her the way an old friend looks at you when he has spent the weekend angry on your behalf. "Sit down, Eunice," he said. "I've had the file out since you called. I came in yesterday afternoon and read every page of it twice, and then I drove down to the recorder's office first thing this morning before they'd even got the coffee on, and I pulled the recorded copy myself, just so there could be no daylight between what I remember and what the county has on file." He sat down across from her and folded his hands on a slim folder, and his voice was gentle, but it had iron in it now. "There is no daylight, Eunice. None at all." He opened the folder. "Let me tell you what your son thinks he did, and then let me tell you what is actually true, because the gap between those two things is the whole story." Daniel Okafor settled his glasses on his nose. "Marcus thinks that because he grew up in that house, and because he moved back into it, and because he changed a lock on the front door, the house has somehow passed to him. People believe that more often than you would imagine. They believe a house belongs to whoever is standing inside it, but a house does not belong to whoever is standing inside it. A house belongs to whoever is named on the instrument recorded at the county, and there is exactly one instrument recorded against that property, and it is a warranty deed dated the spring of 1990, and it carries exactly one name." He turned the page so it faced her, though they both knew she could have recited it. "Eunice Marie Caldwell, an unmarried woman, sole owner. You bought Raymond out of any interest and put it in your name alone on my advice the year Marcus started kindergarten, because even then you were wiser than the both of us. There has never been a transfer filed off of that deed, not to Marcus, not to Lindsay, not to anyone. In the eyes of the state of Ohio and the county of Franklin, that young woman who told you the house was basically theirs now was standing in your living room telling you a thing that is, in the most literal and legal sense available to me, not true." Eunice sat very still. "And the trust," she said, "and the trust." Daniel turned to the second document, thicker, bound in the pale blue cover she remembered. "When Raymond passed, you and I sat in this same office and we did the thing properly, the way careful people do. We placed the house and the accounts into a revocable living trust, and we named the trustee." He looked at her over the rim of his glasses. You are the sole trustee, Eunice, and you are the sole beneficiary while you live, and not one comma of it has changed in 12 years. He paused, and then he said the thing she had half suspected and had not let herself fully think. "I want you to understand what that means about the accounts, because I do not believe your son does. The household accounts that Marcus has been treating as though they were partly his, the ones he assumed became joint when he moved home and started moving money around in them, those accounts are held by the trust. They are not his. They never became his. He has been spending this autumn out of an account that belongs, in law, entirely to you. I am not telling you that to frighten you. I am telling you so that you understand the full size of the ground you are standing on. It is not a corner of the house that is yours, Eunice. It is every brick, every account, every blade of grass in that garden you planted. All of it. Only ever you." For a long moment, Eunice did not say anything. Outside the window, a city bus sighed at the curb and pulled away. She thought of the climbing rose by the porch rail that had taken her 4 tries to root. She thought of 31 years of night shifts, of coming home in the gray dawn with her feet aching in her white shoes, and standing in that kitchen drinking coffee while the mortgage company slept, of the framed nursing pin on the hallway wall, of the boy she had carried to the hospital twice with a fever of 104 before he was old enough to walk. The boy who had stood behind the glass on Thursday and told her she was not family. "What happens now, Daniel?" she said. "Now," he said, "we do it correctly, and we do it on paper, and we do it through the front door of the law, because that is the only way to do a thing like this so that it stays done." He took a clean legal pad and uncapped his pen. "Your son and his wife are not owners. They are not tenants because you never made them tenants. You never took $1 of rent. You never signed a thing. In the eyes of the court, they are what we call guests, licensees, people you allowed into your home, and a guest can be asked to leave. And if a guest will not leave, there is a process, and the process is clean and it is public, and it does not require you to raise your voice or lay a hand on anyone or stand on a cold porch arguing with a man through a pane of glass ever again." He began to write. "I will file the papers in Franklin County Municipal Court this week. I will pull the recorded deed and have a certified copy in my hand. And then you and I are going to go back to that house together with the law beside us, and we are going to read the recorded instrument out loud on that very porch where your boy stood and told you that you did not belong there. And he is going to learn, the way I am afraid he is only capable of learning, with his own boxes in his own arms, exactly whose house it always was." Eunice Caldwell looked at her old friend across his book-lined office, and she did not smile. Not yet. But something eased in the long line of her shoulders that had been held tight since Thursday afternoon. "There's a thing I should tell you," she said. "There's an original, the one we signed in 1990 before you took it down to record it. I kept it. It's taped behind the water heater in the basement in an envelope with the year written on the front." She paused. "I put it there after Raymond, so no one could ever move it. I'd like to have it in my own hands again, Daniel, when this is over." The old lawyer looked at her for a moment, and then he wrote one more line on his pad, and his voice, when he spoke, had gone quiet and a little rough. "You kept the original taped to the wall of that house for 11 years, and they walked past it every single day, and not one of them ever knew it was there." He shook his head slowly. "We'll get it back in your hands, Eunice. I promise you that." She did not know, sitting in that office on Monday morning, that her son had already made the whole thing easier than it needed to be. He had done it on Thursday evening, flushed and warm and certain after the dinner, with the strangers from Dayton still laughing in the dining room behind him. He had stood in the front hall of the house on Hamilton Avenue in the warm yellow light, and he had lifted his phone and gathered Lindsay and her people in close around the table that Eunice had set for 31 straight years, and he had taken a photograph, and then he had put it where everyone he had ever known could see it, with words typed beneath it that he believed that morning to be the simple truth of his life. Family. So grateful. Our first Thanksgiving in the new place. The new place. By Saturday, it had traveled the length of Hamilton Avenue, the way things travel on a street like that, from phone to phone, from porch to porch. Pearl Hutchins saw it and pressed her hand over her mouth all over again. Earl Dawes saw it, and the old man sat for a long while at his own kitchen table, looking at the picture of the young couple smiling at a table he had watched Eunice Caldwell carry groceries past for 20 years. And then he put his phone down very gently, the way you set down something you are afraid you will throw, and he said a few words out loud to his empty kitchen that he would not have said in front of the children. He did not know yet about the deed. He did not know about the trust, or the envelope behind the water heater, or the certified copy that Daniel Okafor was at that moment arranging to carry up 4 porch steps. He only knew what he had seen on Thursday. A good woman set out in the cold like a stranger, and now this, a photograph. The new place as though 34 years could be erased by a smiling boy with a phone. Earl Dawes did not have the law in front of him the way Daniel did, but Earl Dawes had lived a long time, and he had seen prideful men post their certainty out into the world before, and he knew, the way old men know weather, that a reckoning was coming up the street. He did not know when. He only knew to keep watching the house. And across town, in a quiet office on Long Street, Daniel Okafor finished writing and capped his pen and looked up at the calmest woman he had ever represented and told her the day. The day Daniel Okafor named was a Thursday. 1 week to the hour from the afternoon her son had stood behind the storm door and told her what she was, and the morning of it came up clear and cold over Old Town East, with frost silvering the grass along Hamilton Avenue and the bare maples standing black against a thin blue sky. Eunice put on her good wool coat, the same coat she had worn to carry a covered dish up those steps a week before, and she buttoned it to the throat and looked at herself once in Della's hallway mirror, and then she turned away from it, because there was nothing in the glass she needed to see. Della drove her across town. They did not speak much. There was nothing left to decide. They came onto Hamilton Avenue a little before 10. Daniel was already there, parked at the curb in his gray overcoat with a slim folder held flat against his chest, and beside his car waited a second one, and out of it had stepped a deputy from the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, a calm, broad-shouldered young man with a leather folio under his arm, and behind him at the curb, a locksmith's van sat idling with its lights on. No one hurried. There was no reason on earth to hurry. A thing done correctly carries its own slow weight. Up and down the block, the porches had filled the way they fill on a street like that one. Quietly, a curtain drawn back here, a screen door easing open there. Earl Dawes stood at the rail of his own porch 2 doors down in his shirt sleeves. Despite the cold, his jaw set hard, and when Eunice came along the walk, he took the cap from his head and held it against his chest, and that was the whole of what he did, and it was a great deal. Pearl Hutchins watched from behind her front window with both palms flat to the glass and her lips moving over words that were either a prayer or an apology, and were most likely both. Others she had known for 30 years stood in their open doorways and said not a thing, and only watched, and not one of them turned away, because there are mornings on a street when looking away is its own small cowardice. And the whole avenue seemed to understand that this was one. Eunice climbed her own 4 steps. She did not knock. The lawyer knocked for her, 3 even strokes of 1 knuckle on the frame. And after a moment, the inner door drew back, and there was Marcus on the other side of the storm door again, his face behind the glass, in a sweater she did not recognize, with Lindsay close at his shoulder in the warm hall, and Lindsay's family from Dayton risen half out of their chairs at the table beyond. Marcus looked at his mother, and then he looked at the uniform standing quietly at her elbow, and the easy certainty that had ridden his face for a week went out of it like a lamp turned down. Daniel Okafor did not raise his voice. He opened the slim folder against his forearm, and he lifted a single page to the glass so the young man on the other side could read it with his own eyes, and he spoke it aloud in the clear, unhurried tone of a man who had spent 40 years reading the truth to people who did not wish to hear it. Instrument recorded in the official records of Franklin County, Ohio, Daniel said, and he read the long string of figures slowly, every digit of it, so that it could never be mistaken for a matter of opinion. A warranty deed dated the spring of 1990, recorded and indexed, and never once amended in the 34 years since, and the sole owner named upon its face. He paused. Eunice Marie Caldwell, an unmarried woman, sole owner. He let the page come down. "There is no other instrument," he said gently through the glass. "There is no deed to you, Marcus. There is none to your wife. No transfer was ever filed because none was ever made. Whatever you were told this house had quietly become, whatever was said over that table about whose it basically was, the county of Franklin has never heard a single word of it. In the eyes of the law, you are a guest, and a guest's welcome under this roof is the owner's to end, and she has ended it. This officer is here to tell you so the once it will be told without a court behind it." The deputy stepped forward then and did the thing he had come to do, which was quiet and lawful and finished in a moment. He held the folio up so the papers within could be seen, and he named them the civil notice, the order, and he asked the young man to open the door and take them into his hand. For a long breath, the whole street seemed to hold still. Then the storm door swung outward, and Marcus Caldwell reached out and took the papers from the officer, because in all the wide world there was no other thing left for him to do with his hands. You have probably already guessed what became of the lock. You have not entirely. The locksmith came up the steps with his small case and knelt before the shining new lock that Marcus had set into his mother's door to keep his mother out, and on the lawful authority of the one woman whose name stood on the deed, he drilled it. It took him under 2 minutes. The sound was thin and bright and final in the cold air, a high, clean whine and then nothing. And when it was done, he lifted the ruined cylinder out on his gloved fingers and laid it in Eunice's open palm without a word. She closed her hand around the bit of metal that was still warm from the cutting, and she felt the small weight of it, and she slid it into her coat pocket and kept it, the very lock that had been meant to make a stranger of her. Then her son carried his own boxes out of her house. No one made it cruel, and it did not need to be. Lindsay went up the stairs pale and silent and came down with her arms full of folded things, and the visitors from Dayton gathered their coats and slipped out past the porch with their eyes on the floorboards. And Marcus made 3 trips to the curb in his shirt sleeves, carrying cardboard boxes he had taped shut himself, past Earl Dawes, who had set his cap back on his head and watched each trip without a flicker, past the rows his mother had coaxed up the porch rail before the boy was tall enough to reach the latch. He did not look at her the first trip, nor the second. On the third, he stopped at the foot of the steps with the last box against his chest, and his mouth opened, and his mother looked back at him steadily with no anger left anywhere in her, and whatever the words had been, he could not find them in himself, and he carried the box to the car. Somewhere on the road out of Columbus that afternoon, the photograph came down off the internet, the smiling table and the proud caption gone in a moment, deleted by a quiet hand in a moving car, as though it had never once been there. When the cars were gone and the street had let out its breath, Eunice walked into her own front hall still in her coat, and the house stood very quiet around her, and it smelled of strangers and of a week she had not been allowed to live inside it. She did not stop over the moved chairs or the rearranged shelves. She went down the basement stairs with the small flashlight Daniel had pressed into her hand, and she crossed to the dark corner where the pipes ran cold, and she reached into the narrow gap she had not touched in 11 years, and it was there, exactly as she had left it, the flat brown envelope gone soft as cloth with the years. The tape at its seams, brittle and yellow. One thing only written across its face in her own unhurried hand. 1990. It had hung in that darkness through every dinner they had eaten over her head and every word they had said, and not one of them had ever dreamed of it. She did not open it. She had no need. She held it against the front of her coat with both hands, and for the first time in 7 days, she felt her shoulders come down from where they had been held. Then she climbed to the second floor, past the boy's stripped bed, to the cedar closet at the end of the hall that she had kept locked for 12 years and let no living soul open. She drew the small key from the chain at her own throat, where it had hung the whole long time against her skin, under her blouse. And she turned it, and the door swung in on the smell of cedar and old paper. On the shelf inside, where she had set it the autumn she lost Raymond, lay a single folded letter in her husband's careful hand, written near the end, when his strength was leaving him and his mind was clear and certain. She took it down and opened it by the hall window. She had read it 100 times. She read its last lines once more, that the house had been hers from its first day, bought on her own 2 feet on her own night shift wages, that he had lived in it only ever as her glad husband and her grateful guest, and had owed her for the roof over him every happy year of his life, that whatever came after him, she was to give the house to whom she chose or to no one at all, an answer to nobody walking this earth for the choosing of it. Eunice folded the page back along its worn creases. Her eyes stayed dry, the way she had trained them to stay through a working life of other people's hardest nights. But she pressed the letter flat to her chest and stood a while at the glass. And below her, the emptied house ticked and settled, like something letting go of a long-held breath. The rest of it went the way Daniel had promised that careful things go, on paper, in the open, and without haste. The eviction was entered and closed in the Franklin County Municipal Court, a matter of public record now with a number that anyone at all might look up. Daniel himself drove down to the county recorder's office and pulled the certified copy of the deed and laid it in her two hands, and the original she had freed from the basement wall went into a bank box where no dark corner could ever swallow it again. And on a gray morning some weeks after, a widow from the far end of Hamilton Avenue, who had heard the whole of it from Pearl Hutchins across a back fence, climbed the stairs to Daniel Okafor's book-lined office and sat down across his desk and asked him, low and steady, to put her own house into her own name, so that no child of hers might ever stand upon her porch and tell her she did not belong on it. He drew the paper that same week. Her name, and her name alone, went onto the line. On a quiet evening that December, Eunice Caldwell hung her husband's framed photograph back in the front window where it had kept its watch for 12 years. His kind face turned out once more toward the street he had loved, and she fit a fresh bulb into the porch fixture and switched it on against the early dark, and the warm light spilled down the 4 steps and across the walk the way it had every evening of her widowhood until the week they tried to take it from her. Then she went into her own kitchen and laid her own table, and this time she set down 2 plates. One was hers. The other was for the old man 2 doors along who had bared his head to her on the worst morning of her year, and who had never once, in all the long years before it, failed to raise his hand to her across the road. Earl Dawes crossed the dark street and climbed her lit steps, and she opened her own door to him. Behind her, 2 plates steamed on the table.